All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Inbound Logistics webinar. My name is Jeff Vita, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I just want to point out some housekeeping. You're going to be on mute, but if during the course of the presentation you have a question, please use the chat window to message me directly. We'll set aside some time after the presentation to direct your questions to our presenter. Today's presentation is Transform Your WMS Technology to Handle E-Commerce. Supporting e-commerce fulfillment is quickly moving from an opportunity for growth to a fundamental requirement to gain new business and long-term profitability. From an increase in technology integrations with warehouse management systems, sharing visibility and data with your customers, or delivering more services required to meet the growing needs of the consumer, 3PLs need to be prepared to deliver e-commerce best practices. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter, David Miller, General Manager of Platform Services for 3PL Central. David's got a unique background in both supply chain and software development. Has been one of the primary architects of 3PL Central's award-winning cloud-based warehouse management products. He's been branch manager for C.H. Robinson, one of the world's largest 3PL providers, vice president of technology for logistics services, and director of IT for BE Logistics. At 3PL Central, David's duties include managing product life cycles, including roadmap planning, development schedules, as well as spec writing and training. His efforts have helped 3PL Central grow their unique user base by more than 22% on an annual basis. David is a Microsoft certified database administrator and holds a BA in economics from the University of Southern California. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with the Inbound Logistics team to prepare a webinar for transforming your warehouse technology to handle e-commerce. And love that you gave the introduction because it helps me keep my word count down because I am looking forward to singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game at opening day for Dodgers this afternoon. So appreciate that. You know a little bit about me now. I'd love to present a little bit about what 3PL Central does. 3PL Central is a leader in WMS solutions for 3PLs in the 3PL industry. We partner with our customers to quickly transform paper-based, error-prone businesses into real service leaders. We love to help 3PLs serve their customers better, right? Operate more efficiently, and then ultimately just grow faster. Once again, thanks for joining us here. We are going to cover some topics today. Obviously, e-commerce and omni-channel fulfillment has been a dynamic and exciting growth area for several years. And we're really starting to see this inflection point where even the staunchest of B2B 3PLs have had to open up some B2C e-commerce offerings to really continue to serve their customer base. So today we're going to explore how we can service those customers and their e-commerce needs through technology. We're going to look at areas of improvement to ensure that they're running efficient fulfillment operations, and also talking about the importance of complete visibility across the entire supply chain ecosystem. So we talk about transforming the warehouse in this transformative process because, you know, in many cases, what we're really starting to see, it's customers that are pushing the traditional B2B 3PLs to provide more value-added services as they look to branch out into more of a B2C or e-commerce sales model. Questions like, can you handle this? What shopping carts do you connect to? Now, these are all fixtures of fulfillment RFPs. When a business is going out to find a 3PL today, they're asking questions around e-commerce. Right now, the great news is that as a 3PL, if you can confidently answer those questions and execute on e-commerce fulfillment, there's a near endless number of suppliers that are really looking to outsource their fulfillment business to you. So if you think about it, you know, let's talk a little bit about where some of the complexities of e-commerce are that you should consider as you invest in transforming your warehouse through some technology. Maybe this is obvious, but you should expect a much higher order volume that are going to have smaller pieces and larger variances of order types than you would with your LTL or your FTL business. Small parcel fulfillment is often of a magnitude greater in complexity than traditional cross-dock and transloading. And with so much of that variance, along with sort of like what I would call ruthless social media types, it's impossible to hide the inefficiencies of e-commerce fulfillment. Right? It's 100% accuracy. That's the expectation, and that's the SLA. And there's some good news here, though, is that the suppliers, right, the people that are trying to sell these goods, they're just not well positioned to be able to meet those SLAs themselves, right? It's very complicated. So they turn to professional 3PLs that have the tools, the systems, and the platform to be able to achieve and reach those targets. And then finally, let's not forget about managing the entire ecosystem, right? There's an expectation that connectivity and sharing data is just easy these days. And so to live up to that expectation, you really need to be able to move information around to myriad other platforms, be it TMS, OMS, CRM, marketplaces, or even just the shopping carts that are out there. But you have to do it in a way that it's repeatable and scalable, right? So you have to be ready to work with sort of pre-wired APIs and partner providers to be able to accomplish those tasks and have the systems in place that allow you to do that. All right, so starting with sort of servicing your customers and their ever-changing needs, I want to take a minute and look at how technology is really needed just to keep up with the pace of the growth of e-commerce. To help emphasize that unabated growth of e-commerce, we're going to look at historical data that is still continuing to show a really healthy consumer economy. Look at some of the growing verticals of e-commerce fulfillment and some of the services that 3PLs are being asked to take on today and how you can manage those. And then we're going to do a little bit of a quick flyover of some of those service level agreements that marketplaces are imposing on your customers and are making it a really challenging avenue to be able to sort of meet and exceed those expectations. All right, so we're finally going to get into some data. These charts kind of talk a little bit about the retail sales growth over the last decade or so. If you look at that graph in the lower left-hand corner, this is showing us sort of the percentage of growth for both online and in-store retail revenue over the last 10 years. And obviously you can see in 2008, 2009, there's just sort of a huge dip and even a contraction in certain circumstances of retail growth. But literally for the last 10 years, we've seen e-commerce grow at double-digit percents, right? 15% in 2018. But that doesn't tell the whole story because obviously we all believe that e-commerce is increasing. But total retail sales are up 5%, over 5% even last year. And in-store, same-store retail revenue grew 3.8%. So if you think about it this way, wow, we have this opinion that, wow, e-commerce is crazy and all my brick and mortar stores are closing. It's not true. We're seeing growth in every single aspect of the retail industry. If you look at that chart on the lower right, this is actually showing us sort of the makeup of online sales versus the total, total retail expansion. And we see here that basically 14.5% of all retail is attributed now to e-commerce, and we continue to see that trend rise. And again, I don't think there's any great takeaway from that. But what I find what's really interesting from this data is that now really is an excellent time to be able to handle both e-commerce fulfillment as well as traditional B2B and retail compliant distribution, right? There's growth in both ends of that spectrum. So having tricks up your sleeve and technology up your sleeve is a great way to sort of land new customers who are already participating in what we call sort of the omni-channel fulfillment, but also expand your services for existing customers who are really trying to take more control over their B2C business. So we said land and expand. So where are we seeing land and expand opportunities in e-commerce? Well, there's sort of three core verticals that we find to be most common. These include pick, pack, and ship, which is really most often associated with the traditional e-commerce program. In this vertical, it's not unusual for a supplier to be selling merchandise on multiple shopping carts or multiple marketplaces. So having that easy integration point is really critical to being able to say, yes, we support that. Yes, we can service that. Yes, we incorporate that for those customers. A second model that we ultimately see here continuing to grow is what I've labeled here as ERP or drop shipping. And this usually has to do with shipping out goods on behalf of a retailer's website or web presence. And there's also usually a retail compliant EDI component that's going to go along with that drop shipping piece. So you do want to make sure that your platforms are really EDI ready and retail compliant. And then that way you're not going to miss out on this ability to sort of offer this drop ship model for larger retailers that are out there. Chances are you might already be handling some of their B2B replenishment business. This is a good foray now into also accommodating some of their e-commerce fulfillment. Okay, and then also subscription models. You've probably seen these popularized over the last few years. This is where there's sort of recurring shipments of consumables that are scheduled for each week or each month. Usually the consumer sort of gets to pick the mix of items that they want. So no two orders are necessarily ever really the same. So in this type of vertical, it's important to be sure that your warehouse management system and software can efficiently handle things like bill of materials processes that allow you to really convert components into sort of finished subscription boxes or kits. And when it comes to sort of the subscription model, high integrity inventory management, it's going to be key to being successful there. You need to know what product you have on hand, how many kits you can build, of what different types of varieties in order to be successful fulfilling that type of subscription model. But as you look at the internet and you see the ads on social media, these deliveries of in a box model just continues to grow, and that subscription-based revenue for your customers is something that they're trying to get into. So having the tools and the operations to be able to support those models is going to be relatively important for e-commerce growth going forward. All right, so marketplace SLAs, and SLAs are service level agreements, and some of these get downright dirty in terms of the expectations of the marketplace, right? How fast do you need to fulfill something? How quickly do you need to mark an order is shipped? What does the packaging need to look like? What does the packing slip? Is it compliant with our standards? Like, there's lots of things that get scored against a fulfillment house across all of these marketplaces. So a real significant driver for a merchant to actually reach out to a 3PL to help with this type of fulfillment, it has to do with trying to meet these marketplace SLAs and the consumer expectations. We said a little bit earlier, social media is just providing so much transparency that the need to deliver excellent service and products and delivery is just more crucial than ever. But what that means is that brands are more willing than ever to hire the experts to actually help them exceed those expectations, right? It's hard to do that, and that's why they choose experts. If you think about the elephant in the room, maybe being Amazon, they're really protective of their brand, and they want to be known as a customer-centric organization. And honestly, if you fail to meet their service level agreements, it can result in having your Amazon store delisted. And again, this maybe is more relevant for a 3PL's customers than for the 3PL itself. But if you think about the faith that a merchant or a supplier has to put in their 3PL with the expectation that their 3PL partner is going to meet the expectations and not fail, they're literally putting their entire business at stake sometimes because all of their sales are funneling through those e-commerce channels. So again, if you just think about the magnitude of that, it's actually critically important that you have the ability to sort of manage to those SLAs and meet or exceed those expectations. All right. So we love the term best practice. We have lots of best practices and we kind of funnel these things down. But the best practice here, and to reiterate, is just like there are lots of complexities in e-commerce. And there's more and more growing verticals within the e-commerce sector as well. And all that's great. We just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of the multi-trillion-dollar brick and mortar sector as well that's still continuing to grow. So really, as you look into sort of upgrading technology and as you're choosing a technology partner, just be sure that they're all experts in supporting both that B2B and those B2C workflows. All right, so let's move on and let's actually talk about how we can implement some of this technology that helps us run efficient operations. So there's a statistic that something like 70% of e-commerce fulfillment time is spent in the pick, pack, and ship process. And it really got us thinking again sort of about that need to optimize those workflows around best practices, which we just mentioned, really allowing for sort of a repeatable technology-driven process to help us minimize costs and maximize our profits. So the three key areas where we see really high-performing 3PLs look to maximize their operations efficiency, it's through implementing system-driven workflows that actually enforce those best practices sort of automatically, adapting paperless processes that provide task-driven mobile scanning, and then finally by measuring or benchmarking those results and leveraging that KPI data to actually iterate and improve on their processes. So I'm sure everyone on this webinar knows it's not uncommon for a 3PL to have 10 or 20 or even hundreds of customers of their own. And while it's great to say that one workflow size is going to fit everybody, A, it usually doesn't, and B, it doesn't necessarily have to. And now, once again, we are very strong advocates for simple best practice workflows, But that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have multiple best practice workflows to choose from within your customer base, right? Having a powerful warehouse management system that allows you to define which best practice workflow or workflows are best for each customer, or even best for each individual item, right? That can allow the warehouse to operate at maximum efficiency because the warehouse management system can actually guide the complete transaction, right? So there's no need to think about what next steps are going to be because the system actually drives to those results and drives to those best practices, right? It allows you to ramp up new employees very quickly. As you peak season with temporary employees, having the system guide those users into what to do, it's a really impactful way that you can sort of maximize your operating efficiency. And you see here at the bottom, this did you know, this is where we talk about that 70% of fulfillment processing time, and thus really your costs are attributed to sort of that packing process. And here's what we found. It actually turns out that a lot of that cost and a lot of that time, right, it's due to excessive warehouse movement, right? So it's walking around the warehouse to actually pick that product. And we find that a great way to reduce your pick time and the cost is ironically through sort of a more thoughtful directed put away at the time of receipt. So setting up a proper warehouse layout and having the systems and the utilities that actually direct the warehouseman where to locate inventory is an extremely impactful way to ensure that high velocity, synergistic items are located in accessible locations, right? So really by reducing that travel time, that's what ultimately starts to reduce the cost of your pick process. And then speaking of picking, packing, and then shipping, when it comes to e-commerce, you just can't avoid the conversation around small parcel rate shopping, right? Every shopping cart, marketplace, retailer, they all have different methodologies on how to provide free shipping and at what service level, right? There's some expectations out there, obviously, about how quickly we deliver products and how much we're going to pay for it. Some of the largest demand that we see now is being able to designate that orders ship using not only lowest cost routing, but also being able to sort of guarantee a delivery date. So obviously that 2-day delivery service requests are pretty high. But did you know that, I mean, carriers can really hit a lot of points with a standard 2-day or standard ground service ultimately. Hit a lot of points in 2 days with just a pretty standard ground service. So ultimately what that means is you just want to make sure that whatever shipping platform you're using, it's really shopping around not only for the best guaranteed rates, right, to sort of keep pace with your customers' requests to reduce their shipping costs, but it's also shopping and understanding the need to deliver on time within some of those marketplace SLAs, right? So there's a holistic view about rate shopping. It's not just about price, it's also about service and execution and delivery time. So here we go. High-performing 3PLs are also more apt than ever to increase their operating efficiency by leveraging mobile technology in their e-commerce workflows. And we don't necessarily say this is kind of goes beyond mobile scanning, quote unquote, because today, really mobile goes well beyond just that basic scanning, right? It includes things like item image capture, lookups, barcode parsing, and in many ways, it's really become sort of an extension of the main warehouse management system functionality, right? There's a lot of power in mobile applications today. And so, warehouses are using mobile devices to assign priority tasks to warehousemen, receiving, picking, counts, more. Assigning tasks on the fly to a device like this ensures that the user always has work to perform. And it really takes the guesswork out of things like what orders do we need to pick next in order to hit that looming UPS cutoff in order to hit those service level agreements for our marketplace. It also does things like eliminating the line at the CSR's desk, asking for things like, well, what should I do next? What's my next assignment? Because you can actually push all of that assignment and all of those tasks, right, directly to the warehouseman's fingertips, or in this case, at least to their pocket. Other advancements of extended mobile technology is really to capture things like exception-based accessorial charges. So in the e-commerce world and this high volume fulfillment, like auto billing, it's just a must. Like you have to be able to auto bill around the things that you know and that you can automate around. But when certain situations arise, like such as an exception-based relabeling project that you really can't write a rule around, putting the power in the hands of a frontline user who's actually performing some of that work with that project to be able to capture those charges, right? It dramatically increases warehouse operating efficiency because it really cuts down on some of that need to move data back and forth and have additional conversations and keep things in after the fact. And not only does it make things more efficient, the warehouse is also more apt to actually capture more revenue when you capture those types of exception accessorials at the time that they happen, instead of paper tally sheets at the end of the day or the week or the month. We've got lots of good statistics and data to back that up. So being efficient isn't something that just happens because you happen to follow a best practice or you invest a lot of money in mobile scanning and technology, or even automation and like conveyors and things like that, right? It's just not a guarantee. It's about the data and the process that these methodologies enable that allow the warehouse to really be able to sort of measure and thus manage productivity, right? Knowing how long a process takes, it really helps you understand, what does it cost me to service this customer, right? What should I bill my services at? With e-commerce fulfillment, you may be picking to a bin or batch picking or fulfilling one order at a time, but you're not going to know what process is really best for the operation until you establish that benchmark and then sort of iterate on those workflows until you've maximized your profits, right? You need warehouse management tools that really help you collect usable data. And if you don't, you're going to have a really hard time knowing that if any of the changes that you make in the warehouse, be it with your people, be it with your process or your software, right? You're not going to know if those are having impactful return on investments that you might have anticipated if you can't measure it and then you can't manage it, right? So you have to be able to collect this data as you want to benchmark and improve around those best practices. So you heard me mention the phrase, what gets measured gets managed. You've probably heard that before. We used to say that as a mantra at C.H. Robinson all the time. But the idea here is that you can really start to measure and manage your operational efficiency by leveraging warehouse management systems to collect and interpret the type of data that's important to your bottom line, right? You need a tool that can not only collect, but also helps you interpret what you're looking at so you can start to make better business decisions around your operation. All right, so that's going to sort of bring us to our final section on how to prepare warehouse technology for e-commerce processing. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about visibility. Right? So we're in an always-on world, especially when we're dealing with direct-to-consumer goods and e-commerce. So we need to make sure that we have a proactive method to share data, as it's a great way to sort of satisfy customer demand. And at the same time, it helps lighten the burden on your CSR team that's normally used to talking to lots of customers a day or emailing lots of customers today. Because honestly, as 3PLs, that's kind of what we've conditioned our customers to do. When you have a problem, we're the best at customer service. Pick up the phone and call us, and we're going to have a conversation with you, right? But that's not necessarily a sustainable model as we move into sort of more of a high volume e-commerce fulfillment mode. So there are main drivers to successful communication, and it's about being uber proactive, right? It's the proactivity to give your customers what they want before they even ask for it. We're also going to recommend sort of a centralized web portal where your customers can actually log in to view, create, modify, run reports on transactions and inventory. So they really have some sort of way to self-service when they want more advanced details. And finally, providing transparency and communication that turns what would historically have been a number of individual calls and emails into more of a one-to-many broadcast or communication. All right, so I love proactive alerts. And the thing that I love about the most is that they're really simple, they're intuitive, and they're just really impactful for, they're really impactful for the warehouse, the customer, and ultimately the end consumer. So we spent a lot of time talking to warehouses. We surveyed hundreds of them to kind of understand what sort of questions were being asked of your CSRs, right? What prompts a 3PL's customer to call the warehouse and ask them a question and find out information. And so we sort of laid out that list of the top most answered or asked questions, quickly found a way to broadcast those answers to the customer and the consumer before they were even asked. And so using that data that we collected through our benchmarking process, our warehouses have reported saving over 55 CSR hours over the course of a month by not having to pick up the phone and answer hundreds of bespoke emails. And on top of it, the customers seem to love it because they get like really familiar communication types, right? The emails, Excel files, like the things that they'd already be getting from the CSR as that sort of that manual or that human touch. We can automate those things and push those directly out to the consumer and the end customer. So again, in a world of B2B where maybe your volume is a little bit lower, but it's a little bit more service oriented, right? We can get into the fact that yes, we're gonna pick up the phone and take that call. We're gonna send that email out, but as your processing shifts to high volume e-commerce, right, the financials don't necessarily support that level of human element, but you can replicate all of that and still give your customers the best possible sort of experience by automating that type of communication. Because obviously, as you add more volume into the pipeline, there's going to be more customers, there's going to be more questions, and automation is going to be the key to some of that scalability. All right, so for some of those customers that still want to dig a little bit deeper, we talked about having some sort of web portal that gives that customer, that user, some feeling of control. And in some rare circumstances, we still see some customers try to manually enter orders, but giving them some ability to self-service, it still feels like a critical piece to providing complete visibility across that supply chain. And we love the idea of having a permission-based rules as a great way to provide just enough access that your customer feels like they still have some ownership of the process, but without allowing them to get so involved that they're going to impact the operation. We mentioned an inflection point of service and needs of customers at the very beginning of the webinar today. And part of that really goes to show that some of those customers have been trying to manage their own in-house e-commerce fulfillment, and they're getting to the point that they just say, we can't do this anymore. This is too hard. There's too much volume, and we're going out to a 3PL now for the very first time, right? And they have trouble giving up that control, right? This is how we think it should be done. This is what was working. This is how we ran our business. By giving those types of users some visibility to the process, it still helps them feel like they're maintaining some control, but again, they can't actually get so involved in the warehouse operation that they're going to hinder your ability to really do the things that you do best and just execute really well on those service level agreements, right? So again, sort of separating out those responsibilities is a real key to success. Okay, so this is probably the most important part of the entire webinar today. The most impactful technology play that you can make to succeed in e-commerce is to ensure that your warehouse and your warehouse management system is the system of record for all e-commerce channels, right? You, as the 3PL, you're the expert in fulfillment, and you need the tools that ensure inventory accuracy, right? What you say and what your systems say, that's what goes, right? That's what drives inventory for fulfillment. So, I mean, if you don't have products to fulfill orders in the warehouse, all of the marketplaces that are trying to sell that item, they need to know about that. And so having that real-time connectivity and visibility to the WMS is just crucial to avoid overselling. And there are certain circumstances, and this is just as bad, you could lose out on a sale, or your customer could lose out on a sale because the shopping cart didn't know that new inventory had arrived at the warehouse. Right? And so again, having that black hole around visibility by not having connected systems and not allowing the warehouse management system to be that source of truth, right? It hinders the ability to sell appropriately to consumers. I've even seen instances where someone's trying to use an ERP as a system of record for inventory, and that becomes fraught with challenges. Accurate inventory control has to be maintained by the WMS and the 3PL, and that's by far the best way to ensure that all connected platforms are really working together to produce the best end results. And I wanted to point out one more thing here. Some of your customers, so businesses that are just now coming into the 3PL fold, a lot of them are trying to run their fulfillment business on what I would call a point solution, in order management system, a shipping platform, right? The problem with a lot of solutions is they don't offer a lot of inventory control, or in some cases, no inventory control at all. So I just want to make sure that everybody's watching out for those utilities, because they might be like a really useful connected point solution as part of, the supply chain or the offering or the service offering that you have. But those systems, they're going to hinder your availability to or your ability to sort of grow your overall business if it's acting as your main source of inventory control. And that's usually why a supplier who's been trying to run their own fulfillment business starts to stumble after they get over or above, a couple hundred orders a day, is because without that inventory control component, the marketplaces just aren't updated and they're not getting accurate inventory counts in terms of knowing what they're able to sell and what they're not. Okay, so I want to drive that home one more time because, again, it is probably the most important piece of the webinar today. To your customers be successful and help you fulfill e-commerce orders across more than one marketplace, you need to have a strong platform that's just rock solid in keeping accurate inventory, right? And you need something that can connect to the rest of the supply chain ecosystem. And you need to establish yourself as sort of that trusted provider and trusted system of record in order to make all of this run. Okay. All right, so let's just do a couple of quick takeaways, and then we can go ahead and we can open up for some questions. E-commerce is pervasive, right? There is still lots of B2B focused 3PLs out there, right? But their customer needs are really reshaping the competitive landscape of the industry, and it's shifting more and more that e-commerce is just going to be a part of the standard delivery offering of really any competitive 3PL. Rigors and risk of managing e-commerce fulfillment programs are just too immense to not have the right technology driving to sort of meet consumer expectations within the marketplaces. There's just too much variance out there, and the stakes are too high to not have tools and utilities that help you deliver excellence for your customers. There's always room to improve, and the dynamic e-commerce industry gives a lot of opportunity to benchmark around best practices and use that data to improve your operating efficiency. What's great about e-commerce is that there's probably going to be lots of orders coming in, right? You turn on that spigot and next thing you know, you're drinking from the fire hose. The good news about that is if you guys don't get real efficient real fast, you're going to struggle and you're going to miss those SLAs. And because you've got so much volume coming through, you've got a lot of data that you can use to really benchmark and improve. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there, but ultimately it becomes a good thing in terms of getting really dialed in on some of that benchmarking. And then finally, as a 3PL, you are the experts in fulfillment. So you just need to own it, and you need to make sure that your systems and platforms are really positioned as that main source of truth across the entire e-commerce ecosystem, right? Because you are the key to your customer success in fulfilling their e-commerce and omni-channel orders in this sort of B2C world. Okay. So once again, thank you so much for attending today. I appreciate everyone taking 45 minutes of their time. I think we're going to open it up to some questions. Jeff, I'm not sure if you recorded any coming across the chat channels that we can speak to today.
Absolutely, David. Thank you for all that information. Just before I get to the questions, I'll just pull a few from the chat. We won't be able to get to all of them today, but if you missed any of this webinar, it will be available to you again at the link, and there will be more opportunities to get to that, and we'll get to that after the questions. But David, we got a few here. One of the questions that we got was, when fulfilling e-commerce orders, what types of mobile scanning devices work best?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you saw in the presentation today here, we sort of showed some what we would call consumer grade devices, right? Your mobile phones, your iOS and your Android devices. We would also classify that there would be, consumer grade, and then we would call what we would say retail grade. And these are probably more like industry type, tough shell cases around sort of more of a consumer grade hardware. And then we would say that there's warehouse grade, and that would be like traditional to your like your Zebra type MC 9200 series scanners. What we find is that in fulfilling, like in running all of the operations for a 3PL warehouse, be it B2B, B2C, e-commerce, a mix of multiple different types of devices is what works well. Typically, we see on the receiving side having more of a warehouse grade device seems to be best because you can sort of lock in that real experience. It's all about scan, 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 scan. And then on sort of the outbound side, where we're dealing with lots of little things, obviously carrying around a large scanner isn't necessarily conducive to having all of your hands free and being able to move things around. And so what we see there is then that layering in of that sort of that more consumer grade device with maybe something like a Bluetooth wedge scanner sort of attached for some of the inputs. And by using the different types of devices in tandem or synergistically, it's really going to provide you sort of that best experience. So again, it's not one size fits all. It's using the right tool and the right device for the right situation. And you get to that through some of the benchmarking that you would do in terms of your iterative steps. Yep. Thanks, Jeff. Is there anything else?
Yes. Speaking of tools and devices, another question: do you see robotics as an integral part of e-commerce fulfillment?
Cool. Yeah. Robots are going to come, right? For sure. And I don't think they're quite there yet, but the cost is definitely coming down. I definitely think that we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, robots, or what the term now is cobot, sort of a semi-smart device that sort of assists a human worker in their tasks. Those are going to become more prevalent, especially in fulfilling some of this high volume e-commerce. We just sat on a panel a couple of weeks ago at an industry event, and we talked about this, and there were a number of large 3PLs that were doing e-commerce fulfillment. And their comments today were that they don't see the return on investment quite yet. But as sort of the labor force continues to get tight and contract, a lot of those businesses are actually investing in sort of their employee experience, making things better for the employee, better lunchrooms, better breaks, better bathrooms, better upgrades in the facilities, which I thought was really interesting. So it feels like the double down right now is trying to get the most efficiency, right, and the most satisfaction out of employees. But I would anticipate that in the coming years, as we start to see sort of more technology-assisted human elements come into play, and then ultimately some transition to more robotics and conveyors. Yeah, it's a pretty long-winded answer, but it's an emerging place, and I think that we're very excited here from 3PL Central's aspect to see how we're going to engage in that and how our customers are going to engage in that in the near future.
Okay, great. And we'll do one final one. At what point do you see a vendor reach out to a 3PL for fulfillment help?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually they reach out about 6 months after it's too late. But kind of what we find there is a lot of businesses that are trying to run their own e-commerce fulfillment, they're trying to do it off of a point solution. And so this might be a point shipping solution. Maybe this is just their shopping cart that they've bought into. But the challenge there is those are solutions that are really good for getting orders in, and those are solutions that are really good for shipping orders out. Those are not good solutions for managing inventory or managing warehouses. And so typically what you would see is that at about 100 orders a day with one of those point solutions, that's where you see a business start to say, oh man, this is getting hard. At 200 orders a day, that's when they really start to look for a better option, be it their own warehouse management system or go to look for a 3PL to get involved and actually help them with that fulfillment. And then usually at that 300 to 500 orders a day, those businesses have either made that migration to a real warehouse management system, or they've gone out to find a 3PL that's using these tools in these systems to be able to help them meet those SLAs. Because it's all about delivering the products within the SLA of the marketplace and meeting that consumer demand. And if you don't have the tools to be able to do that, like, you're really going to struggle. And the negative impact on a business when you can't meet those SLAs is just huge. Like, the risk is too big. And so we would like to see those businesses start to engage with the 3PL a little bit earlier, because again, when they're shipping 500 orders a day, it's just late. But ultimately, that's kind of where we see it. And that 100 to 200 order range is where we'd like to see a business either move into warehouse management officially or find a partner that's going to be able to execute on those SLAs for them.
Okay, great. That's awesome information. David, we're going to wrap up the questions there. Anybody who does still have questions that we didn't get to, the contact information for 3PL Central is there on screen, and David and his team will be more than happy to address them with you. Again, if you missed any part of this webinar, you can go back to the link later and it will be made available for you. David Miller, 3PL Central, thank you so much again for joining us, and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Perfect. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks Jeff for hosting today. It's been a real privilege.